Hello and welcome to Catalyst Conversations. Today I'm joined by Dominique Lamb, who's the face and voice of the retail industry here in Australia. Welcome, Dominique, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Now tell us, as the CEO of the National Retailers Association, what's going on in the retail industry at the moment? We're seeing a lot of shift, a lot of change. Is a change in consumer behaviour driving a change in the retail industry, or is the retail industry driving change in consumer behaviour?
I think it's a really interesting question because I think within Australia, prior to COVID-19, our retailers were certainly struggling in many categories. And, you know, off the back of bushfires, obviously, that we had around Christmas time, and then, of course, we had the virus hit as well. Retailers were really starting to reconsider, I guess, where they were placing the value, where they were looking to change and pivot. And there was already kind of this, I think, feeling that disruption was coming. And I guess now what we've seen is that certainly as a result of COVID-19, a lot of retailers within Australia have seen this huge focus on digital. And if they weren't focused on digital, they're definitely moving that way now. And we have to remember that, due to the size of the demographics within Australia, only 9.5% of Australian consumers spent money within retail in that digital component. But now, it's certainly looking like that growth or that acceleration that we were expecting over 5 years is definitely quicker. So we know that that's probably sitting in the double digits. We also know that demographics in terms of online shopping have changed in Australia, so that the older generations are certainly engaging, and also the younger generation as well.
Yeah, I mean, in the context of digital, I think there isn't an industry out there that hasn't felt some sort of acceleration with regards to technology and having to keep up. But before we dive into some of those changes, just from a consumer behaviour perspective, what are the unique things about the way Australians shop retail?
Look, I think that Australians typically as consumers are very much loyal to certain brands that they will shop with time and time again. And the way that they pick those brands really comes down to, does that brand reflect my values? And we've seen this real rise in, I guess, consumer activism, where if a brand doesn't meet the value standard of a consumer, or something occurs, or there is an incident, for instance, a consumer will leave that brand for a period of 6 months. And their expectation is that there will be an apology or that there will be a change in behaviour from that brand. And so we're really seeing this, I think, drive from consumers to change the nature of how we're buying and how we're selling. And all of those things. There's a real push around circular economy, sustainability, and also just diversity in general. So making sure, of course, that, they're making the right announcements, they're supporting, I guess, the right movements. All of those kinds of things really matter to consumers at this time. We also know that Australians have the highest cart abandonment rate in the world. So when we shop online, we like to put things in our online cart, we leave it there, and then we absolutely go and look for bargains. And we will purchase with the person or with the business that can give us the most frictionless experience. We want free postage, we want the best price, we want it as soon as possible. So all those instant gratification type things are key to the Australian consumer.
Yeah, so we're loyal, but we're also extreme bargain hunters.
Absolutely, that's right.
Wow. Now, I mean, look, with the pandemic and everything that's going on, you're hearing about some companies doing extremely well. We're seeing reports of, Wesfarmers reporting record profits for the second half year, with the likes of Officeworks and Bunnings seeing revenues up 14 to 20%. We're hearing about luxury brands like Dior opening up new stores in George Street in Sydney. Who's doing well and which sectors are not?
Look, I think that any of those categories within what would be considered an essential service, so something around, certainly groceries, supermarket, liquor, tobacco, anything like that, typically is doing quite well. Even news agencies, where people are still accessing kind of the physical news and things like that. We also see categories around this concept of nesting or cocooning. So anything to do with white goods, electronics, homewares, furniture, are also doing really well, because I guess under lockdown, people have started to DIY their homes. They've started to create these safe spaces for themselves. And it's all about making sure they're as comfortable for as long as possible within those spaces. The categories that have done, or that are absolutely struggling, certainly have been our services. So people like hairdressers, nail bars, anyone that provides those one-on-one services has, absolutely had a very, very hard time of it. Even restaurants, cafes and fast food have also had quite a difficult time, particularly now in Victoria, where fast food's never really been defined by the Victorian government. So it doesn't sit with restaurants and cafes, it doesn't sit with retailers. And this concept of food courts, even though they're less touched than many of these restaurants and cafes, have been shut down completely. So there is that element as well, but also discretionary spend categories. So things like apparel, where you've got to touch and feel and try things on, certainly footwear, jewelry, anything in that category, makeup, has really struggled through this period just because of the nature of the product.
What's the Australian government doing to support the sector, and how are they balancing the tension between regulation and innovation?
Yeah, look, I think that the thing about Australia, of course, is, we have the federal government that has provided quite a lot of stimulus in terms of keeping people in jobs and really looking to ensure that businesses, that haven't been able to trade have been supported via JobKeeper and supplementing what they're paying their workers. That system wasn't perfect and has been flawed in some ways, particularly in the sense that because we have an award system, for instance, retail workers often are entitled to less under the award than what they would be under JobKeeper. So getting them to come back to work has been quite difficult because they're on a better wicket on JobKeeper. But I think that aside from those things, aside from trying to keep people in jobs and to stimulate business and keep them with employees, we've also seen them invest in what's called Job Trainer. And Job Trainer is really about understanding that we're going to have, something like 2 million unemployed people, that potentially certain industries like tourism, may not be operating for some time, particularly if international borders remain closed. How do we take those people and put them into other industries like retail, which is the second largest employing industry in the country? And so how do we retrain them? And what does that look like? And that is an interesting initiative because it's funded half by the federal government, but then also states have to sign on and match that funding. And a lot of the debate around that has been, what kind of skills do you want to see on there? What industries are we talking about reskilling? And there's also been a focus, I think, around on, creating a new understanding of the digital world, particularly for small business, making sure that they can pivot if they don't have the expertise within their business. And, just making sure that I guess they get to make those choices around diversifying their offering. That may not have come to them, had there not been a government grant or something along those lines.
Yeah. I mean, all the support that they can get at this time.
Yes.
Tell us about some of the great innovations that you've seen come through in the sort of last 6 months, where you've really seen a shift or some impressive turnarounds.
Yeah, I think there's also been lots of different innovations in different ways. So we have certainly there is a business that was a uniform retailer. They had shop fronts. They were also manufacturing uniforms for many businesses across the country. They actually pivoted into medical PPE, which was very, very clever, particularly because there was a high demand at the time that they did it. They ended up growing a multi-million-dollar business because they were already importing things like hand sanitizer, masks, gowns, gloves, all the things that retailers now need to make sure that their workers are safe and also that their consumers feel safe. So that was a very interesting model. The other thing we've seen is, I guess, businesses engaging with their consumers in a different way. So IKEA have just launched this concept where you can actually sell back your old furniture to them and purchase new IKEA furniture, which really works with that cocooning model. And of course, Amazon Flex has come to Australia. So, engaging with your consumers to make them part of your logistics, because we know there has been delays with logistics across the country, and getting them to become delivery drivers. And also, of course, giving them money back in their pocket so that they can spend it with you if they're already, stuck to your brand. We've also seen within that food sector. Certainly the creation of their own delivery lines, smaller menus, different price points. And of course, the movement with, I guess, people being at home and cocooning has also meant that we've seen a number of brands, and in particular an apparel brand, really change the way they're communicating in terms of, we knew consumers were looking at, say, 1 minute of digital content. Now they're happy to watch up to 15 minutes. It's more about vlogging. It's more about teaching them a skill or something, whether it be styling or cooking or any of those things. And really just engaging, I guess, with consumers in a different way, which in turn, leads to them purchasing more product.
Yeah, absolutely. And those changes, I'm sure, will continue to happen. You talked about the employees earlier. Tell us a little bit more about how they're being impacted, because I'm sure with more people buying online, are you seeing less people going into stores, and therefore are we seeing more stores closed down, more for lease signs coming up? What does it mean for the employees in general, and maybe even touch on their well-being?
Look, it's definitely been tough, I think, for retail employees, because in our view, they are those frontline workers. And the biggest issue has been that, whilst we are seeing closures, whilst we are seeing more for lease signs, the ones that have remained on the front line, that have remained serving customers, have also been the ones that have had to enforce social distancing and say, you can only have X amount of people within your store. Can you wear a mask? Can you sanitize? All of those kinds of things. And the thing about retail is that we employ the most youth in the country. So the workers that are delivering these messages to consumers are young people. And unfortunately, we have seen an incredible spike in customer abuse and customer violence across the country. In fact, in some locations, it's been up to 100%. And the biggest issue, of course, has been, asking people to do the right thing, or asking people to engage, in regulations not set by retail workers. And I guess the misconception is that within a shopping centre, that a security guard has the right to intervene, or that they can, have someone removed, when in actual fact they can't. They can ask them to leave, and that's about the extent of it. So it's really been about, I guess, getting that support from law enforcement to enforce the regulations that are being put in place, by state and federal governments across the country. But it's certainly been hard. So not only have retail workers had to contend with, am I going to lose my job? Am I on JobKeeper? But they've also had to contend with this kind of customer abuse element. The other thing, of course, has been now in Victoria, where they've seen quite a significant lockdown, young people being, confined to their homes, having concerns about job security, amongst other things, has been definitely very, very difficult. And mental health has certainly arisen as one of those key issues for employers to be concerned about.
I've got to ask, looking at your background and some of the great things that you're involved with personally, you run an organisation called the Dancing CEOs.
Oh, funnily enough, so I sit on the board of what's known as Women's Legal Service in Queensland, which is a pro bono legal service that offers legal support for women experiencing domestic and family violence for themselves and their children. And part of that is that they run a charity event called Dancing CEOs that I'm the chair for. That particular event is a gala event that runs every year, typically in May, this year in October, for about 900 people, where we get 12 CEOs to learn how to dance with professional dancers. We give them backup dancers, and then they have to perform in front of 900 people, and everybody, in effect, donates to them. And then we have, 3 winners, whether that being obviously the champion of charity who raises the most money, or it might be the People's Choice, or alternatively, it will be the person that advances, the cause against domestic violence the most through, various things. But it's a very, very exciting night, and certainly we raise a lot of money, for the legal service.
It's wonderful. It was a beautiful cause, and I'll rack my brain and have a think about a few CEOs to put in the ring for that one. Now, we're almost out of time, but there is one question that I have to ask everybody on Catalyst Conversations, and that is, if you could travel back in time and visit yourself on day one of your career, what advice would you give yourself?
What advice would I give myself? I think the advice I would give myself was just roll with the punches. in effect, I actually started my legal career as a building and construction lawyer. So I don't think that I ever thought I would end up as the CEO of an employer union, not practicing employment law so much anymore. It's definitely been a transition. And also I just think I would remind myself just to always do what I love, because I think that's where you get certainly the most productivity and the most fulfillment, and it keeps you happy. You've got to spend a lot of time at work, so it's important to be happy there.
Yeah, well said, Dominique. I think it's always critical to be passion and purpose driven, and your career is clearly a great example of that. I want to say thank you for spending some time with us today and sharing your insights. I know that the community will certainly appreciate that, and look forward to seeing you soon. We wish you and the NRA all the best, and hopefully see you on Dancing CEOs in October.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.